Okay, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome. My name is Casey Murphy, and I'm ACT's Director of Programs and Events. I want to thank you for joining us today for ACT's November webinar entitled Bike Incentives, Do They Work? Sponsored by our friends today at Foursquare ITP. Before we hear from our presenters this afternoon, I wanted to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. First, all attendees are on mute during this webinar. If you have a question or have a problem hearing us, please type it in the chat box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer your questions as the webinar gets going. Second, we will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type in your questions as we go in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please note that when asking a question, please type in the person's name, who the question is for, so we can make sure that that gets directed to the proper person. Finally, this session is being recorded and we'll have the recording up on the ACT website within 24 hours after the presentation ends. Now I'd like to pass things over to David Strauss, ACT's Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT currently has going on. David?
Thank you, Casey. Good afternoon. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. As the premier association for TDM professionals, our goal is to build a strong community of individuals and organizations working to advance and implement TDM at their work sites and within their communities. Webinars like today's are an important benefit to you as a member of ACT, providing you with valuable information on the latest trends and important knowledge to make you more impactful in the work that you do. Today's webinar brings forward a topic that is always at the core of what we do within TDM, and that's incentives. And do they actually work? And today's speakers will be focusing on the use of incentives to increase bicycling, a mode that benefited greatly from the pandemic, but can still be a tough sell to skeptical and worried commuters. For some, the barrier is the purchase of the bike itself. For others, it's the sweat factor and the time commitment. And our speakers from Foursquare ITP, our webinar sponsor, Contra Costa Transportation Authority and 511 Contra Costa, will discuss the effectiveness of bike incentives in increasing the use of the bike for commuting. To the individuals joining us today that are not yet ACT members, and I know there are quite a few of them, I welcome you and invite you to become a member of the ACT community. I guarantee you that ACT membership will be a valued investment in your professional growth, with many more valuable opportunities like today's webinar. After today's event, you'll receive a note from Elizabeth Denton, our membership experience manager, offering an opportunity to connect and learn more about ACT. And I hope to meet you soon in person at a future event as a full-fledged member. I want to take a quick moment to update everyone on some of the news from the organization. Yesterday, we had exciting news with President Biden signing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This historic legislation provides record levels of funding to transportation. Within the bill, there are many new programs and initiatives that present opportunities for TDM. Programs like the Congestion Relief Program, the Carbon Reduction Program, Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. Even broadband expansion will provide billions of dollars in new funding to help advance TDM initiatives. Our task now, and the task on all of you listening, is to get engaged in your state, MPO, and local planning processes to really guide these funds in the directions that improve mobility and access for all people while delivering climate and congestion improvements. Over the coming weeks and months, ACT will be presenting information to our members on many of these exciting programs. You can also learn more within the public policy section of our website. Registration is also open for the virtual TDM forum on December 14th. The half-day event will bring together hundreds of TDM professionals from around the world and will feature a fabulous keynote address from Dr. Reagan Patterson, who will speak on the important and relevant topic of creating equity in public transit. There'll be 6 breakout sessions on a range of themes. We'll recognize our 2021 class of 40 under 40 honorees. And of course, there'll be plenty of other learning opportunities and networking. So I encourage you to go and register today on our website. Registration is $45, and there's also group discounts available if you want to send 5 or 10 or more individuals to the event. And talking about conferences, ACT recently opened up our call for sessions for next year's international conference that will be held in Chicago during the first week of August. I encourage all of you to think about your programs, organizational operations, challenges you're facing, and coordinate with a broader group of individuals to propose a session that you believe will add value to the program. Proposals are due in mid-December, so get cracking on them all. Now it's on to today's webinar. Bike incentives, do they work? To kick us off, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. We have Kirsten Reicher, who's project manager at 511 Contra Costa. In her role, she's working to promote clean air modes of travel. Kirsten has over 10 years of experience in TDM, active transportation, and public health programs. She's developed innovative programs from the Contra Costa Transportation Authority's TDM and Safe Routes programs that focus on long-term behavior change to reduce SOV trips, improve public health, and reduce air pollution and climate change. We're also joined by Peter Engel, who's the Director of Programs for the Contra Costa Transportation Authority and manages its funding and programming of public transit, transportation for seniors, and people with disabilities, and TDM in the county. He has 27 years of experience in the public transit and ride-sharing industry and provides strategic and technical assistance in areas related to transportation service programs, program delivery, regulatory compliance, emerging technologies, and public-private partnerships. And to start us off, we have Barbara Marino, the TDM for Schools coordinator at Foursquare ITP. Barbara's passion for sustainable transportation began in her hometown of Chicago, where she fell in love with public transit. Prior to her career in transportation, Barbara focused on digital communication in the labor, education, advocacy world. Her role at Foursquare ITP focuses on building a TDM program at DC public schools for school staff, families, and students. Her goal is to develop a long-lasting culture of walking, biking, transit, and sharing a ride to get to and from DC schools. Barbara, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, David. I'm so excited to be here and talking about bike incentives and their effectiveness. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so for our agenda for today, I'm going to talk a little bit about our client, the District Department of Transportation, and of course, talk about our wonderful Get Paid to Pedal bike incentive. And of course, leave you with my contact info. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. And of course, as Casey mentioned, there will be questions at the end, so feel free to type those into the chat. All right, so let's get started. Let me tell you a little bit more about our client, the District Department of Transportation. So for the District Department of Transportation, a couple of things that you should know. So it is both a city DOT and a state DOT, which kind of gives it a very unique position. As you can see from its mission and vision, it focuses a lot on sustainable transportation and multimodal transportation, and ultimately with the goal of reducing congestion and greenhouse gases across the city and making sure that transportation is equitable across all of our 8 wards, which is a great place to do TDM. That's exactly what we do. So Foursquare ITP has been primarily running the Go DC Go program, which is DDOT's, which is how we call it here, a TDM program called Go DC Go. It is an initiative of the District Department of Transportation. And of course, right, we're here to encourage the use of sustainable transportation across all 8 wards. And we've been running it since 2017. And since its launch, which has been over 10 years at this point, we have helped 313,000 people shift to a clean commute. We've decreased traffic by cutting down 120 million single occupancy vehicle trips. We've eliminated 357 tons of carbon dioxide from the air, and we have saved 82 million gallons of gasoline, which is pretty great for only being around for 10 years. going to tell you a little bit more about kind of how GoDCGo sets up its services. So first up, we have our employer services, which focuses on, of course, employers of all sizes here in the district to make sure that they are complying to the DC commuter benefits law and providing good commuter transit and other options for their employees. We also have programs for residential complexes here in the district to make sure that they are providing, again, good information and options so that they can choose sustainable options to get to and from DC, wherever they might be going. And we don't just focus, of course, on the residents. We also want to make sure that our visitors here in the district also have that same level of information and resources so that when they're choosing to get around and explore this city, that they have the proper information to make that commute sustainable and still enjoy their experience here in the district. So these are our existing programs, and this is where I come in. So in May 2020, GoDCGo launched school services. So Foursquare ITP launched school services for the GoDCGo program. And that's me on Walk to School Day this year, handing out some goodies to some very adorable children. And GoDCGo School Services is here to provide information for all schools in the district. So from private schools, charter schools, and public schools, we are here to provide assistance to all schools, making sure that they have the proper information about transit benefits and increasing them and increasing those commuter benefits, to securing bike parking, and also figuring out, right, if carpooling is a great option for them. And I'm here to serve all audiences that travel to and from school. So not just students, but also the staff and the families as well, to make sure that they have sustainable and affordable and healthy ways to get to and from school. So I wanted to show you this slide in particular, because I think it really sets up not only kind of why we created this wonderful program for DDOT and GoDCGo, but also why we created this bike incentive. So in 2020, we did a survey of DC staff, DC school staff, DC students, and DC families of students who go to school. And we gathered a ton of data, which allowed us to create this program. And we developed this fun infographic to kind of give you a snapshot of what the state of the DC school commute is like. And so I want to point out a couple of items here. So one big point that I want to pull across is that number on the bottom left-hand corner, which if you can't read, it says 27% of students in DC attend their in-boundary public schools. So that means there's a lot of traffic to and from schools. Only about 27% of kids roughly have access to be able to walk to and from their school, which means we have a lot of families and students kind of trying to figure out ways to get across the city and get an education, which of course necessitates a TDM for Schools program. Another big point that I want to kind of emphasize is that middle one, kind of the biggest percentage that you'll see, which if you can't read, it says 78% of DC school staff, according to the survey that we did, drive alone to work, which is a pretty big number. And to kind of give you some context within the larger TDM work going on in DC, we can kind of estimate that the drive alone rate is roughly in the between 30 and 40%. So as you can see, it's about double if you're a school teacher or work at a school. So of course, right, again, necessitating a TDM for Schools program to really kind of target that demographic and really develop some mode shift. And the last point, which leads us very nicely into the bike incentive that I want to point out on this infographic, is that 2.2% of school staff bike to school. Again, a very small percentage of staff using this sustainable mode to get to and from school. So that, of course, kind of led us naturally to have one of our strategies be to develop and implement a bike incentive program to help reduce that extremely high SOV mode of 78% in the district. And that is exactly what I'm going to talk about next. So, Get Paid to Pedal, our DC school staff bike incentive. Let me tell you about it. So let's get down to the basics. So Foursquare ITP launched this campaign for DDOT and GoDCGo in April of 2021. we, spoiler, I know it says, do they work? They do work because we were able to relaunch it in October 2021. So we're actually doing another one again. We provided DC school staff who had recently purchased a bike in the last 6 months up to a $250 reimbursement. We required proof of purchase to make sure that they weren't just getting a bike off of Facebook Marketplace or anything like that. And of course, they also had to fill out an application that had some legal language and set some terms for kind of participation in the bike incentive. The reimbursement came in the form of a Visa gift card, which is just as good as cash. And of course, we wanted to make sure we were capturing data. And so we sent out surveys to the people who received the bike incentive during their first 6 weeks from approval to really kind of capture that immediate effect that this bike was having on their commute. And then again, after 3 months, 6 months, and then of course, a year later as well. So let's talk a little bit more about the environment. So I kind of spoke earlier about the DC school environment, how people are getting to and from DC schools. So I wanted to kind of elaborate a little bit more on kind of why we're so excited that this bike incentive was effective. And so one big important thing to know is I know I mentioned that I was the most recent Go DC Go service that was being provided. FITP launched this bike incentive for DDOT when schools were still not 100% on site. So this was May 2021. Schools had not been across the board required to go back on site, staff or students. They were still very much in hybrid or in sometimes fully remote options. So that commute also looked very different than had we launched a program like this now, or even 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, would have looked very different. All the 3 school systems in DC, the public, private, and charter ones, they don't follow the same classroom schedule. Roughly they do, Of course, they get summer break and winter break and all of that, but those specific dates and rules and back to the classroom aspects do vary from school to school and system to system. So we had kind of that challenge to kind of go up against. Another interesting fact, and this is also in the state of the school commute slide that I showed a couple slides before, is that about 40% of school staff roughly don't actually live in Washington, DC. So again, a very unique factor of doing TDM here in the nation's capital is that not only does our work impact those who live in the district themselves, but also those in Maryland and Virginia as well. And so it does make it a little bit harder to back to work when you do have to cross state lines. So we did want to be mindful of that since, a little less than half of staff are kind of spread across Maryland and Virginia as well. So we wanted to kind of factor that in and be conscientious of the fact that that might impact the success of the program. And then last, but definitely not least, is that we launched Go DC Go School Services, or Foursquare ITP, launched Go DC Go School Services during the pandemic. So our launch date was May 2020. So we were fully embedded into the pandemic, a pandemic baby, if you would like to say. So up to that point, from our launch, our general TDM for Schools launch to the bike incentive launch, we had primarily been focusing our messaging and programming around providing information around safely commuting when choosing sustainable modes. So this bike incentive was the first time we were really actively trying to change the way that school staff commuted to and from school. So it was very exciting. It was really our first kind of foray into that. And with that, I'm going to talk now a little bit about kind of what our expectations were, kind of based on this environment, based on this survey, based on kind of just our experience so far up to the point of the launch of the bike incentive and how that kind of impacted our expectations, and also kind of talk about the reality of what we saw and go into details there. So let's talk about our first expectation. So of course, given all of that, given that we were still in the middle of a pandemic, schools weren't back in session full-time and on-site full-time, we were, of course, very concerned that we were going to be unable to distribute all the funds, What's going to happen? Are we going to be able to, distribute all of these funds, right? We obviously want to make this impact, but is it going to be possible kind of given this environment that we're kind of launching this bike incentive in? And I'm proud to say that it worked. Spoiler, sorry. So we launched on May 4th and we ran out of funds on May 25th, 2021. So in just 21 days, we ran out of all of the funds. We had more applicants than funds. We had 116 total applicants, but only gave away about 41 incentives and had 41 slots. So we gave away nearly $10,000 to school staff here in the district towards the reimbursement of a bike, which was very exciting for us. It was basically all the money that we had to give to them. And so we're very excited to have that success. Let's talk about another expectation I had, which was, so I mentioned earlier that because we were concerned about kind of the commute and how it had been so different for school staff for so long, that we wanted to expand the requirements of the bike incentive a bit. And so we kind of expanded it to say, if you bought a bike in the last 6 months from when you submitted an application, you could get a reimbursement, right? So personally, I was expecting to see a lot of Christmas bikes, right? A lot of maybe Valentine's bikes, a lot of gift bikes. And what actually ended up happening was that of the 41 successful applicants, only 11 actually had receipts from the previous 6 months. 30, or about 73% of school staff, actually purchased a bike because of our bike incentive. So all of the receipts were from May 2021, which was very exciting to see because we're thinking about impact and really kind of changing the way that people think about their commutes. Just offering this incentive really allowed people to open that door and go through it and really go ahead and buy that bike and start commuting by bike to school. So 73% of bikes were purchased after May 4th, which was our campaign launch date. Another expectation we had was all the bikes would roughly cost $400 to $600. The bike incentive was $250, as I mentioned earlier. So that makes sense, right? People probably want 50% off their bikes. That'll be a great way to kind of help them make this a new commuting choice. And what actually happened was it was kind of all over the place. So we actually reimbursed a bike that was $114. That person actually went on to win one of the challenges. So, all right, don't let anyone tell you the cost of the bike impacts engagement. We also had someone who had bought an e-bike, probably helped them a little bit less, but we did kind of help them as well. And then overall, the average bike cost was around $782. So roughly around what we were expecting, a little bit more. I also wanted to talk about the percentage of bike costs that were covered by the Get Paid to Pedal incentive. So I'll read it off the chart, just it's a little confusing, but 17% of people had up to a quarter of their bike costs covered. 33% had between 25% or a quarter to a half of their bike costs covered. 14% had somewhere between 50 and half or 3/4 of their bike costs covered. And 36% actually had their costs covered between 3/4 to 100% of their bike costs covered. So we actually spread the gambit quite a bit when it came to how much support we were providing staff on the bike incentive. And I'm really happy to say that 14% of our bike incentives actually purchased a bike that cost either $250 or less than $250. And so they're actually 100% covered by Go DC Go School Services bike incentive, which was very exciting because we got to provide some really, really great benefits to a very deserving audience. All right, again, another expectation we had was that most applicants will be from DC, right? It'll probably be a little bit tricky to kind of bike across state lines. And what actually happened was it was met. 75% of applicants lived in DC and the remaining applicants lived in Maryland. So about 25% did live in Maryland. So we did have people being willing to do multimodal commutes to work. So taking the bike to the train, putting the bike on the train, all of that stuff. So that was very exciting to see as well. No applicants from Virginia in the spring one, but we do have some in the fall one, which is very exciting. Right. And again, because DC does have these three distinct school systems, charter school staff, at least during the pandemic, had been more likely to have returned to the classroom in some capacity. So kind of the expectation was, right, well, at this point in the pandemic, most applicants will be DC charter school staff. And what actually happened was that it was a near 50-50 split. So if you actually look at the number of charter schools in DC and the number of public schools in DC, they're about 50% each. So it actually mirrored that very nicely. And we only had about 2 staff members from private schools, private institutions receive any kind of reimbursement. And on average, the public school staff did have some slightly more affordable bikes, but it was maybe about like $50. So not too big a difference, but I thought it'd be a fun fact to point out. All right, of course, a huge concern we had was like, great, we're going to give people this money and no one's going to take our survey, right? We're just going to have some gaps in kind of the data that we're hoping to collect to really see the effectiveness of everything. So what actually happened is that so far, at least 75% of the staff who were part of that first round have responded to at least one survey. And from that survey data that we collected from them during the first kind of parts of the incentive, we can estimate that during those first 6 weeks, this bike incentive actually reduced VMT to and from schools roughly by 150 to 200 miles a week, which is very exciting. So that means roughly the first week alone, the incentive reduced VMT by nearly 1,000 miles, which PowerPoint actually helped me include this fun fact. There's actually the distance between Florida and New York City. So that's a great way to kind of think about that. We're thinking about the impact and the VMT that we were able to reduce. And here are some of our lovely bike incentive recipients. One of the surveys was to kind of do some challenges and take pictures of you with your new bike. And so here we have them enjoying some urban trails, some more rural trails with their bike. And it's just very exciting to see them enjoying their bikes. Right. And so I wanted to kind of wrap up with some key lessons learned. So challenges work great for getting data. So during the first 6 weeks, we were able to get that 75% of people taking the surveys. And we believe that's kind of due to the fact that we had challenges for them to do. So it was like, great, you got a new bike, you got that momentum of just having purchased the bike. And then they have a thing to do immediately. So we could kind of start impacting that commute immediately. Like, hey, you should go take it on a coffee run. You should map out your commute to school, right? You should do this. All of that helped a lot. So we had over 100 survey responses during those first 6 weeks from 3/4 of the people who took the survey, so which is really good. Another key lesson learned was to kind of give people options for how to receive the money. So gift cards are great, but they sometimes can't be used everywhere. So one key part of this campaign was that we had both a digital and a physical gift card option. So some people might have had their eye on something from some online store, but other people might have had their eye on something in person. It's good to kind of give those options and make people feel really good and like they could actually use that reward, which is what we want them to feel. And then don't just focus on the money, right? Of course, the bike incentive in and of itself is a huge motivator for people. But one thing that we learned is that the educational materials actually helped a lot too. So not only did we create a survey, but we also, and the intake survey and the surveys to kind of keep track of that data. And of course, distribute the funds, but we also had a campaign page which was full of bike resources, including kind of where to buy, what groups to join. And one fun fact that kind of came through that was, I mentioned earlier that a lot of the bikes were actually purchased after the bike incentive launch because of the bike incentive. And many of the receipts actually came from the bike source that we highlighted. And we've heard stories from our participants that they've actually gone to join some of the bike groups and bike rides that we promoted on that campaign page. And so it really kind of helped create that community and provide those resources, right? Because one thing we wanted is to kind of switch those beginner bicyclists into more standard bike commuters. And so that those resources and that information kind of all in one area really helped us and kind of helping to achieve that goal. All right. And lastly, I want to make sure I kind of shared my contact information. I know they're going to share it again at the end, but wanted to make sure I included it here as well. And of course, say a very warm thank you to everyone. Thank you so much for hosting us for this webinar. We're really excited to be here, and I will hand it over to Peter.
Need to remember to unmute. Thanks, Barbara. My name is Peter Engel. I'm with the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. I just want to talk a little bit about, before I turn it over to my colleague, talk a little bit about the perspective of the public agency and supporting TDM programs in general, and also bike programs and commute reduction programs. So again, I'm Peter Engel. I'm the Director of Programs for the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. CCTA fulfills two roles. We're the congestion management agency for Contra Costa County, as well as the sales tax authority for a transportation sales tax that our residents voted at a 2/3 vote in 1988 and then renewed that in 2004. So we get a 0.5-cent sales tax for 25 years that we use to support all kinds of transportation programs, transit, and capital projects as well. And 1% of that goes towards commute reduction or commute trip reduction programs. So we combine that money with some money that we get from our local regional air district to put together our what we call 511 Contra Costa, which is the TDM program that CCTA funds. If you're not familiar with Contra Costa, we are in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay. Our county is a large county. It stretches from the Bay all the way east to the San Joaquin Valley. So we go from urbanized area to rural agricultural area, but primarily we consider ourselves a suburban county. So providing these programs in a suburban setting is a little bit more difficult. Most of our residents that commute a long distance into either Oakland or San Francisco. And so we're always looking for ways to give them opportunities to get out of their car and find other ways to commute, whether it's commute by bike for the entire trip or to commute by bike to BART or another public transit operator to get them to their final destination. CCTA has been supporting these programs for, like I said, the early 90s. We have 3 offices in our 511 Contra Costa program that are operated independently from the authority, one in West County and one in the southwest part of our county, and then one in Central County, which also serves the east part of our county. So we have quite an extensive program for roughly the 1.2 million people that live in Contra Costa. Part of the success, I guess you would say, from COVID is like David mentioned, we're getting more people out, more people on bikes. So we took the opportunity during COVID to start promoting some bike programs more effectively. And one of those, or 2 of those programs, is going to be discussed by Kirsten Riker. She is the program manager for several of our bike programs and a couple of our countywide bike programs. Just to mention, the picture there is my wife's e-bike. We have started the e-bike use in our family, and Ella the dog likes to ride with her to her office when she goes into the office, and the dog gets to go with her. So very strong supporter as a public agency of these alternative modes, and we really think that e-bikes are going to make the difference. So with that, I would like to introduce Kirsten Riker. Kirsten is with, like I said, with 511 Contra Costa as a program manager, and she's going to get into more detail on some of our summer bike challenge and our e-bike rebate program. Go ahead, Kirsten.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for that great background. So with that, I'm going to just dive right in here. I'm excited to try and answer today's webinar question about, do bike incentives actually work? I'd like to start by bragging a little bit about my beautiful home state of California. In terms of bike commuters, data shows that the San Francisco Bay Area has over 3 times the national average, which makes sense because we have a great year-round climate. We're a progressive state that cares about climate change. And here in Contra Costa, we have an awesome network of Class 1 bike trails weaving throughout our cities. Now I'm bragging about lovely California and our much higher than average rate of bike commuting, but the reality is 3 times the national average actually translates into a whopping 1.97% of all commuters, so less than 2%. So the question of today's webinar, do bike incentives work? Well, if 2% is higher than average, I think we'd all have to say, not so far. So in Contra Costa County, we're trying to change the bike incentive playbook. We believe the answer can be yes, if you play the long game toward building lasting behavior change. Asking people to get out of their warm and comfortable personal vehicles and onto a bike is a huge ask. It requires a lot more effort and exertion than simply waiting at a bus stop. It's more dangerous than carpooling with a stranger. You might even have to change clothes and do some kind of a bird bath in your work bathroom. So unless you're already an avid biker, those are pretty big and pretty legitimate roadblocks for most of us. And if you are an avid biker, you probably don't need an incentive from your friends in TDM to convince you to try biking to work. In fact, avid bikers are not ever our target audience for our programs. We're after car drivers. So what's the answer? How do we get drivers to start biking to work? We think the key is the middle step. Get drivers to become avid bikers. And I'm talking about the normal people, not the bike advocates, not the members of the beat packs and the bike club members, but your regular everyday coworkers, your neighbors, moms and dads, students. These are the folks we need to appeal to. So today, as Peter said, I'm going to talk about 2 of our more successful bike incentive programs, the Summer Bike Challenge and our e-bike rebate incentive. Both target non-bikers, I should say, and are actually getting regular people on bikes and replacing car trips. The first program I'm going to talk about is the Summer Bike Challenge. This we started in 2015. It's free, open to people of all ages, and runs from June through August every year. It's designed to give people a focused opportunity to experience the fun, easy, no pressure biking to local spots around town. The goal is to show people that biking can easily replace driving for local trips. It's designed to be a habit building program that turns drivers into avid cyclists. Each city in our county, and we have 19 cities, gets a unique game board with 12 city-specific destinations for people to bike to during the 3-month summer program. Participants simply cross off the squares anytime throughout summer on their own schedules. All destinations are public and cost-free to visit, and the challenge changes with new destinations each year, which keeps people looking forward to it year after year. Adding to the fun, we host several pop-up events throughout summer in each city, and we give out what we call free stuff for cyclists who bike to select locations on certain dates. Typical incentives for these events are $5 gift cards for things like Starbucks or Jamba Juice. These events serve as both participation drivers, but they also provide our staff with opportunities to perform community outreach, give in-person kudos and encouragement, and help us build our loyal following, which drives participation in our other non-biking TDM programs. During the 2020 COVID year, when our in-person events couldn't take place, we offered incentives for people to send bike selfies from some of the game board destinations. This year, we offered a hybrid format, offering both in-person events as well as virtual options involving selfies again. Now, when people register for the Summer Bike Challenge, they can opt into the bonus weekly challenge, which is an email component. And amazingly, about 90% of all participants choose to opt in. This bonus challenge consists of a different themed bike ride each week. We ask people to bike to any location, completely separate from that bingo looking game board you saw earlier, to capture the week's theme in a selfie. And the prize for doing this is a chance to win one of 5 $35 gift cards, which we award each week. So there were 14 weeks this summer, and we sent 14 Monday morning emails with a new theme each week. And examples, you can see some of the pictures that people sent in from the themes. We had things like Go for the Gold, which this guy is my favorite. We sent out, that was during Olympic week, of course. Bike racks was a theme one week, which of course got people looking for and becoming aware of bike parking options in their cities. Other themes like this one here, bridges and tunnels. So people loved this. Over the summer, we got hundreds and hundreds of photos demonstrating that the program does cause people to make intentional bike trips. The weekly email component intentionally uses principles of behavior change to make it effective. These emails serve as frequent, regular prompts, allowing us to act like a personal coach to condition people into the behavior we want. The regularity of the weekly emails had people looking forward to the next challenge and engaged with the program and the mode of biking for 3 consecutive months. Now, picturing yourself doing something is necessary for it to happen. So by giving people sort of a vague task that's open to interpretation and creativity, we subtly required people to think about and visualize biking to different places. By presenting a unique theme in a cheerful, personal email with a 1-week deadline for completion, participants likely spent time each week imagining various bike ride destinations and talking with family members about various bike routes where they could capture the week's theme. The weekly reward system was simply a chance to win prizes. So even without giving everyone an incentive, the chance to win was motivation enough for hundreds of people to accomplish a weekly bike ride. The additional motivation also came from posting all of the photos in our online photo gallery. This public recognition gave people a sense of belonging in a group of like-minded people, while also recognizing individual achievements. Plus, the photos and posting of the weekly winners drove participants to our website every week, where they, of course, had a chance to explore other TDM programs and information beyond just the Summer Bike Challenge. Out of nearly 1,500 subscribers and a total of about 17,000 emails sent, only 6 or 7 people asked to be unsubscribed during the 14 weeks, which to me is pretty incredible. As seen in follow-up surveys, 79% of people reported biking to destinations that they usually reach by car, and people reported that they plan to continue their biking habit at the same fairly high rate after the program finished. So while the Summer Bike Challenge obviously is not going to cause people to convert 100% of future vehicle trips to bicycle trips, the fun and positive memory-making experiences reported each year show that the program provides a lasting positive impression about biking and the 511 Contra Costa program as a whole. Many participants report that they've been doing the challenge for years, which shows that the concept works and that our brands are worth paying attention to. So beyond the switch to biking, they are now hooked customers who will be receptive to other trip reduction programs as well. So next, I'm going to talk about the second program in our presentation, our e-bike rebate program. This launched just over a year ago in October 2020, and it was the first of its kind in the Bay Area. We're currently evaluating our follow-up survey data, of which we have a lot, and you won't see too much of it in this presentation, but stay tuned. But so far, the data is very interesting and very hopeful. The goal of our program was to award 500 rebates worth a total of $100,000 of incentive funding. 50% of funding was reserved for low-income residents, defined by 400% or less of the federal poverty level guidelines. So far, we've issued 490 rebates, so only 10 shy of our goal. The program, as Peter mentioned, entirely funded with local sales tax money earmarked specifically for commute alternatives. We're selling a mode here that's much different than traditional biking. And we're trying to appeal of car drivers of all ages, including older adults, college students, those who don't want to use or are not well served by public transit. Bike share in Contra Costa County is currently very limited, with only one city recently launching a pilot. The program has almost no restrictions on the type of e-bikes that we allow. All class 1, 2, and 3 e-bikes qualify, as do new conversion kits. 100% electric mopeds also qualify if the maximum speed is under 30 miles per hour. So this has not been popular. We have not had a single application for a moped. The only exceptions here are that bikes must be new, they must have pedals, except for the moped, cannot be models that are marketed for children, and must cost less than $5,000. We recommend that people buy from local bike shops, but we do allow purchases from anywhere. And in fact, Costco and Amazon have been very popular suppliers so far. To prevent fraud, we make sure people have actually purchased a bike by asking for a photo of its serial number. We require proof of county residency, proof of age, and a complete sales receipt. One of the goals we built into our program was to increase public awareness of the mode itself. Our goal was to create a group of unofficial e-bike ambassadors in every neighborhood who will continue to promote the mode and educate friends about e-biking long after the rebate funding has been exhausted. This word of mouth advertising is working. Our follow-up survey asks what type of reactions people are receiving from other people about their e-bikes, and 95% of rebate recipients report that they've been asked about their e-bike or e-biking in general by friends, family members, neighbors, coworkers, and strangers. So if every person who gets a rebate talks to at least 3 people about it, and our survey data tells us that the average is much higher than 3, then that means our program is reaching at least 3 times more people than we're serving directly. I've learned that the best way to sell e-biking is to simply let someone ride one for themselves. So I'd like to share a quick story to illustrate my point. This photo here is my dear friend and neighbor, Cindy. She's a typical suburban woman, not particularly athletic. She's a wonderful person and a typical Contra Costa resident who drives for every trip. This is someone who used to ride a regular bike maybe once a year. This past spring, she and her husband test rode my new e-bike, and I told her about the rebate program I was running at work. She loved it. She was hooked. And 2 weeks later, she and her husband each bought an e-bike of their own. Fast forward 6 months, and last week she texted me a photo of her odometer showing that she hit the 1,500 mile mark in 6 months. So it's been a life changer for her, and I'm hearing many similar sentiments in our follow-up surveys. Now, in addition to her own accomplishment, Cindy's also turned 4 other Contra Costa residents into e-bikers too. She convinced 2 of her colleagues and her next door neighbors to get e-bikes and to apply for our rebate. And backing up just a little bit, my husband and I bought our own e-bikes about a year ago from some friends who got them and said, you have to try these, take them for a test drive. So if you do the contact tracing in this saga, 2 original e-bikes in my own personal story led directly to the purchase of 8 additional e-bikes in the county. So the point here is that a program that gets people on e-bikes is going to continue to pay off through word of mouth. Now, you obviously can't evaluate a program's success on personal stories alone. So is it actually working, and what is the data showing us? We send follow-up surveys 2 months after a person receives their rebate, and we have an incredible 85% response rate, which again tells us that people are very excited about their e-bikes. We know that our participants are mostly middle-aged who own or use cars for the majority of their trips. The vast majority report they are replacing car trips with e-bikes, and 88% are riding 1 to 7 days per week. As TDM professionals, we certainly don't want to create programs that are going to take people off buses. And our data shows that e-bikes are not replacing public transit trips, at least not in the suburban areas like here in Contra Costa. This next slide is my favorite. The top chart shows that before owning an e-bike, 71% of our customers, seen here in orange, rarely rode a regular bike. These are people like Cindy. Of these non-bikers, as seen in the second chart below, over 85% of these never or rarely bikers are now riding e-bikes 1 to 7 days a week. This data is incredible because it shows that e-biking should not be put in the same category as traditional biking. E-bikes should be strongly promoted as an excellent, non-polluting low cost, new alternative to driving. The additional benefits to public health and mental well-being that come with e-biking are not the topic of this webinar, but they can certainly help in promoting the mode. There are very few climate change actions in transportation for regular people that are as easy, as convenient, relatively inexpensive, and as fun as e-biking. So an extra incentive from our programs and yours could just be the tipping point for widespread adoption. So as I said at the beginning, we're going to have a full report with a lot of data ready to share in the next few months. And when it's ready, a link will be posted on our rebate webpage. So if you're interested, please stay tuned and check out 511contracosta.org in the coming months. So in wrapping up the presentation, the point I've tried to make today is that getting people to start biking on a regular basis takes time. If you want to get drivers out of their cars and onto bikes, you have to play the long game. You have to make them love biking. So with so many people currently re-examining their old commute and their future work schedules, there's never been a better time to start nudging. So good luck with your own programs. Thank you for listening. I hope you're still awake. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Casey.
Thank you very much, Kirsten. That was a fabulous presentation. We're going to go ahead and get started here with the Q&A. I want to let folks know, I realize there are a ton of questions and we're not going to get through all of them. So just want to let you all know that the contact information is up for everyone. Please feel free to reach out to this group after the webinar concludes today if your question was not asked. And once again, please type in your question in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. I just threw up a quick poll here real quickly to just gauge how today's webinar went for you. We're here at ACT just looking for feedback and as we start to plan for our 2020 or 2022, I don't know why I keep doing that, webinar scheduled for next year. So we'll just give it another minute or so here for that. And while we're doing that, I just real quickly, Barbara, I'm going to toss the first question over to you. I know the biggest question that was asked today more than a couple times was on tracking, and a couple questions asked about after giving, a $250 reimbursement, do you have a way to know if people are actually, they keep going to school on a bike or if they're not? And, how do you track that school staff are using their bikes to commute to work rather than using them exclusively for recreational use?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so I will say that people have been honest during the surveys. And one thing that I kind of earlier was that was kind of a concern, right? People weren't going to school full time. They were going to school maybe 2-3 days. A few were maybe required to be on site, or a few schools were requiring their staff to be on site every week. So people were very honest in their surveys. There are surveys where people said, this week, right, I didn't. One thing we did track in our surveys was why. We wanted to know why they didn't choose to bike to school that week. And, the answers kind of varied. A lot of the time it was kind of weather related. That was kind of the big one. And obviously I live here, so I can confirm, right, that it had some bad weather, that they weren't able to do that. But that was one big way we were actually very honest in their surveys.
Okay. In those surveys, what types of questions were you asking? Were you able to verify, that they were actually using the bike to commute to campus versus just, obtaining it? Like, what kind of questions? I think that was the other big one that was being asked.
Yeah. So in terms of the questions, for the more like usage surveys, they were focused on where they went. So we did not just assume that they were biking to and from school and kind of use that as a rule of thumb. We did ask them to track and tell us, did you go any place recreationally? Did you go to school? Did you go grocery shopping? We really wanted to track all the ways that they were using these bikes in addition to their commuting, right? So school, of course, right, was an option, but we also wanted to track all of those. We wanted to track why they didn't. We wanted to track proof that they actually did complete the challenge. And so that was very important. That's where I actually got those photos that I showed earlier in my slides. Those were actually, people actually had to get very creative and take a picture. Like one of the challenges was to do a coffee run. And so people were literally like in front of Starbucks, like holding their mug and like trying to pose with their bike. were very serious about showing and proving to us that they were actually actively using those bikes and were commuting to school.
Okay. Kirsten, a couple questions here for you as well. I know there was someone who asked, what platform were you using in running these programs?
It was very basic. We used Google. We used Google Forms for our rebate applications. Is that what you mean? Yeah, and
Yeah.
I answer the emails and I approve the applications myself. Very simple.
Okay. And with the slides that you were showing in terms of, who the rebates are going to, the income and everything, how did you verify the income for the rebate?
Well, we allowed people to submit proof of enrollment in any kind of public assistance program. And we listed various options such as CalFresh, which is a food subsidy, a low-income housing voucher, et cetera, things like that, Medicaid, or they could provide the first page of their of their 1040 from last year.
Okay.
And, we would ask people to please block out your social security number. So we had a minimum chart. So, you could line up with total household income.
Great. Next question, I'll turn this over to you, Barbara. Barbara, on cited state lines barrier, is that just distance or is there a bureaucratic reason that, complicates things?
It was more kind of a distance concern, right? I think when we were obviously kind of targeting people who were going to be new bike commuters, that was kind of a big focus. And so distance ends up being kind of more of an issue, right? If you're new, you're more willing to bike, right? Maybe 1 or 2 miles than you are to kind of figure out a path from Maryland into DC.
Excellent. Okay. Kirsten, a couple questions here for you as well. How did you ensure that participants in the Summer Bike Challenge are non-cyclists?
Oh, you don't have to be a non-cyclist. Those are the target audience. So everybody is certainly welcome to participate. We do ask in all of our programs, what is your primary mode of transportation for most trips? And so we always ask, we always make sure that we include people who are drivers, but also people who use cars through TNC or get rides from friends and families, because those are all vehicle trips we're trying to eliminate. But everybody was welcome.
Okay, good to know. And with the pedal requirement, was that for a fitness thing or what was the reasoning behind that?
No, that was, we had a lot of requests for electric scooters in the beginning, and we just sort of made an executive decision at the beginning that our program wasn't going to rebate electric scooters. I think the data shows that e-scooters tend to replace walks more often than vehicle trips, and where e-bikes tend to replace vehicle trips more often.
Right.
So we wanted bikes.
Great. And lastly, I'll end with both of you if you just want to kind of give a little bit here. A few questions were asked about your marketing initiatives and what channels you use. So I'm going to start with you, Barbara, and I'll end with you, Kirsten. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we definitely wanted to get the word out. That was very key to the success. So I had built up a network of DC school organizations, both just kind of like higher level ones, kind of like the State Board of Education, the public school system, but also one part that was kind of very key to the promotion was actually the unions for the schools. And so those kind of networks, right, they're there to kind of support their staff and support get them benefits. And so this was definitely something that they kind of heavily promoted for us, which was very helpful.
Our program, we have as I said in the beginning, our 501 Contra Costa serves 19 cities. So we often work with the public information officers for each city to help get the word out through the city channels. Nextdoor has been popular with a lot of our cities. The library system helps us. And of course, the schools for Summer Bike Challenge is a big one.
Awesome. Well, I wish we could get through more of these questions here, and unfortunately we can't. And I knew this was going to happen. So again, I encourage you to reach out to our panelists today and and feel free to ask them any of the questions we did not get to this afternoon. I want to thank all three of you for a fabulous presentation today. I think it was very insightful and tons of information for folks to take away. Want to just remind all of you that we will have one more ACT webinar before the end of the year. It will be the Return to the Office, New Mobility Strategies, sponsored by our friends at We Drive You. Registration is now open on our website, and more information will be coming out in the coming days. Once again, I want to thank you all for joining us today, thank our speakers, and we hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.